Coming up on More Than Before.
Decide to have turning points in your life. Let things that happen to you be what happens in you that brings out the best of you.
This is More Than Before with Nathan Cook.
Hey everyone, welcome back. It's going to be an absolutely incredible episode coming up here. My guest today is an amazing man who has overcome some insurmountable odds and difficulties in his life to be here today. He's currently the Senior Director of Sales for Affinity Waste Solutions, the nation's second largest valet waste provider. He has been a two-time state wrestling champion. He was a semi-pro football player. He's a professional archer, which is pretty amazing. He hits the mark on a lot of different areas in his life. He was a babysitter, a really good babysitter. I think you might have known one of those people that he's babysit. Small little couple brothers called the Jonas Brothers. He is an award-winning coach. His credentials alone could fill up the entire time that we have today. But most notably, he's a devoted husband and a father to two incredibly gifted young women who he calls princesses. My good friend, Jason Stoughton, welcome to the show, brother. How are you?
Man, I'm super good, but I'll get better, especially when I had a chance to relive chasing around Joe, Nick, and Kevin Jr. in the sanctuary at Christ for the Nations Institute, where I attended Bible college, seeing their dad and mom rehearsing on that stage, saying, "Do you mind wrangling those kids and watching them and make sure they don't tear anything up?" Little did I know, a few years later, I'd be walking into my house, watching 60 Minutes and seeing Kevin Sr. on there going, "What's he doing on 60 Minutes?" And the whole thing being about the Jonas Brothers and me never realizing the Jonas Brothers were the Jonas Brothers when they were little that I got to help wrangle up in the sanctuary at Christ for the Nations. So, no, brother, it's good to see you. It's exciting to be a part of this opportunity. And I love the value and the approach that you're having the impact with everything that you're doing right now. So it's an honor for me to be here, and it's always good to connect with you.
I love it. You know, it's funny because you know someone in passing, like we've known each other for a number of years, but as I've gotten to know your story more, as I've gotten to learn more about you, how amazing it is to see you nowadays. Because when Jason walks into a room, you guys have to understand this. When he walks into a room, the room just brightens up. He has this amazing smile that just fills a room. He has this countenance, this energy that walks before. There's like, and it's not like an overpowered high energy. We're like, like bright light. We're talking there's like a peaceful light that he walks in and he smiles and he just fills a room. But here's the thing. Looking at him, you might say, man, this guy's got it made. Like life has been probably pretty good for him most of his life. And I got to tell you, I think the people that walk with the kind of countenance that Jason does have lived a ton of life and a ton of pain. And we're going to dive into that today. So, Jason, I want to jump straight to the beginning of where life started. Tell us a little bit about where you grew up and what was life like up until about the age of 12?
Well, thank you for those kind words. I don't know how much of that is true. Well, suffice it to say, I was a Midwestern boy. I was, one of those people that I think John Mellencamp and Tom Petty talk about, Indiana boy on an Indiana night. I was born in Northwest Indiana, where the only thing you could see are cornfields and steel mills, and winters were cool for me as a kid. I didn't know any different because that's all I knew, but they were always dreary and cold and gray. And anyway, there's a lot of depression up in those areas because winters last forever and there's always snow on the ground. There's not much you can do unless you are a kid. But I was a kid from a fractured home, born into adversity and hardship, but also forged through adversity. And we'll get to that in a little bit. But I was grappling with challenges later in life around the age of 12 that we're going to get to that most people could hardly imagine. My father, my very first hero, and instilled in me a resolute spirit to navigate and overcome life's storms. I watched him never, ever lose his cool, always be calm, cool, and collected under pressure. And he was one of those people that could mentor you from across the room. He was a man of few words, but tied everything to action. So anytime I heard my dad's keys jingle off the key ring, or him putting on his boots in the foyer of our house, I was running there to put on my boots and go wherever my dad went. Lived in Northwest Indiana until I was about 8, and then my dad took a job in South Central Wisconsin, where we lived on a dairy farm on almost 100 acres, and it was the best season of my life as a kid. I can't imagine it being any better. You know, I was with a fishing pole in one hand and a bow with another, and I even have this picture of my dad and I out on a Saturday morning in our whitey-tidies, just him and I. He's got a cigarette in one hand, and I've got this bow in the other, and I'm shooting my bow on our farm at 8 o'clock in the morning. I mean, it was everything you could ever want as a kid. I mean, animals, you know, being able to hunt and fish, and it was just the perfect scenario for a young boy to create memories that would last a lifetime with his father. Was there until the age of 12 when my dad took another job to Georgia and moved us there while I was kicking and screaming. I did not want to leave Wisconsin. I did not want to go to Georgia. I did not want to change anything that was going on in my life, but ultimately I had very little tenure and seniority for my vote to count for anything at 12. We moved to Bremen, Georgia, and my dad took a job right outside of there, and the wheels fell off the tracks after that. There was a lot of tension in the house. My mom and dad weren't very functional. My mom had always struggled with mental health challenges and just different things. She's got the biggest heart in the world, and I love my mom to death, but she made a lot of bad choices, and recreation drugs, prescription drug addiction, and it was a lot on my dad. So the whole reason I learned later in life for us moving from Wisconsin was, although it was good for me and my sister and him, he didn't want to leave. But in order to try to salvage the marriage, he had to get my mom out of that environment because it was not bringing out the best in her, unfortunately. So we moved to Georgia, and then 2 days before my 13th birthday, my parents divorced. And then shortly after that, my dad took another job out of the country to go move to Puerto Rico and work in Puerto Rico. And that's when life really hit me the hardest, and I was faced with all sorts of adversity at that time.
Yeah. And you were the middle child, if I'm not mistaken, too, right? So I think sometimes, you know, not all circumstances are exactly the same, but I do find that the middle child does often get lost in the mix. You know, you have the first child, and then you have the baby, and then you have the middle child that kind of disappears. And so there's kind of that piece that kind of naturally plays its part. But I want to rewind just a little bit, because I'm curious about some of those earlier days with your dad where you would go out with him, where you go on a hunt, or maybe you go fish. Like, what was one of those early memory lessons that you remember being with your dad and him talking to you and maybe telling you something back then that you relate with so well now as a father today?
I mean, there are so many of them, Nathan. As it relates to hunting, I can remember my dad would always go with some buddies to Winamac, Indiana, and they would go pheasant hunting, and it would be a week in a pop-up camper, and there'd be 3 foot of snow on the ground, and I was this little bitty old guy, and I just wanted to go. My dad would say, "I don't think you can keep up, kid. I mean, it's hard walking, you know." And I said, "Well, I'll walk behind you and I'll step in your footsteps." You know, I was always looking for a reason to be with my dad. And so for 3 years I would go, and he never made me feel like I couldn't go because I was a hindrance to him, and he couldn't be himself around his buddies because all of his buddies were like family to me. I still called to the day he passed away Fred Eason, my Uncle Fred, and he wasn't my uncle, but I grew up around Fred because he was thick as thieves with my dad, and he was always on these pheasant trips. And so for 3 years I would go, and we would go pheasant hunting, and I know that I was too young to have a firearm at that time, but I always had my pellet gun. And when we would get back hunting, my dad would set up his beer cans out there, and he'd say, all right, sharpshooter, let's see how good you are today. And, and he would just coach me with, how to squeeze the trigger, not pulling the trigger, but squeeze the trigger, and just these little bitty things. And then he would relate it to life. You want to make sure that every shot that you get counts. So you want to do the same thing over and over again to your favor, and you squeeze that trigger and allow that consistency over time to compound. And then it's second nature for you. Well, that fourth year I got to go to Winamac, Indiana. I brought my pellet gun, and we started off on the picnic table, and I was shooting these Coke cans and beer cans. And he said, I got a surprise for you. And he got his friends to come around, and he went back into the camper and pulled out this long box, and he set it down on the picnic table. He said, let me see your pellet gun. And he took it from me. He said, open up that box. And I opened up that box, and it was a 410 single shot shotgun. And he said, I think you're ready to shoot pheasants. And didn't think I would ever shoot one. He just thought he'd get a kick out of watching the gun go bang, and so the first pheasants that we got our dog Gunny to point, he put me up in front and wanted me to take the first shot. And when I did, that pheasant came out of the ground, and I turned it into a feather pillow. I mean, I smoked that thing, and he was so amazed. And I ended up shooting 3 or 4 more pheasants in a row after that. And so applying a lot of those early life lessons of, just squeeze the trigger, and he would throw up these little clay pigeons, in the air, and see if I could shoot them and stuff. And he prepared me for those big moments in life, where we've learned from John Maxwell, when opportunity presents itself, it's too late to prepare. You have to prepare yourself for opportunities on the front end. He prepared me for those, but there's so many lessons like that. But I can tell you, living in that farmhouse where the only way that you could heat that house was with wood heat, and it was in the kitchen, and my sister and I we stayed upstairs. There was no central heat and air. It was, you open the windows in the summer and hope to get a breeze, or you just hope that the heat would rise upstairs so you didn't freeze to death. It was my job to actually fill the wood box during the winter time and bring the wood in. And my dad was working midnights, and I came home from wrestling practice, a long week, and I was tired, already dark. And my mom lifted open the wood box and pointed at it and said, you need to fill the wood box. And I went, okay. She said, don't let that fire go out. And I said, okay. And I went to bed. I didn't fulfill my end of the deal. And about 1:00 in the morning, my light got tripped on upstairs, and I had these wool blankets in there on top of them. Standing over me was my dad, and he looked at me and he said, did you forget something tonight? And when he said it, you could see his breath. and I just grabbed my wool blanket and I pulled it up over my head, and I said, no. And he said, I think you forgot something. And he reached and he grabbed those wool blankets off of me and he threw them on the floor. And there I was in all my pride and my Knight Rider light blue pajamas. My dad says, get your ass out of that bed and go fill the wood box. And so he went downstairs, made himself a cup of decaf coffee in the kitchen, and sat there and watched me bring in 8 loads. And it was one of the coldest winters that we had ever had there. And then he would look and go, you stack it. I want to see you stack it. And after that, he sat me down next to him as he sipped on his coffee, Nathan, and he said, in life, you're going to be faced with a lot of stuff that you don't want to do. But the one thing I want you to never forget is that people are always counting on you. He said, whether you feel like it or not, a man's only as good as his word. And if his word is no good, what does that say about the man? And so I can tell you so many like that. And I never forgot them. Never. And my dad was somebody that never had to tell me something more than twice. Or really more than once. All he had to do is look at me. And I did not want to disappoint him. But there's so many lessons like that just carry over into helping you forge that foundation of character and integrity that really matter in life. And I could tell so many stories. I borrowed my neighbor's lawnmower from across the street in Georgia. He had a smaller yard than me, and he had this snapper lawnmower, and he'd be done with his small yard in about 30 minutes on a Saturday and want to play. And there I am out there with a push mower and an acre and a half, and it's an all-day event for me. And so I told Al Aiken, I said, Al, I got to cut my grass. And he goes, well, my dad just bought a new snapper. Why don't you use our old one? I went, that sounds like a great idea. So I borrowed his lawnmower. He showed me how to run it, in 45 minutes. I was done. And then I took it back over there. My dad came home on that Saturday because he was working 7 days a week and says, your mom says it's, at first he said, the yard looks good. And I said, thanks. And he said, your mom said you borrowed Al's lawnmower. And I said, I did. I said, I think we should get one. And he goes, well, maybe we should. He said, but I got a couple questions for you. When you got done borrowing it, did you wash it? Did you clean up underneath the deck all the residue and remnants of the grass that you cut? Did you fill it up with gas and return it? And I said, no. He said, well, you're not done borrowing it. He said, get your ass over there. Apologize to Mr. Aiken. Tell him you're not done with it. Bring it over here, and you're going to clean it. He said, you never borrow anything and return it in the same or worse condition than you found it. You understand me? And I said, yes, sir. And to this day, I still wash cars from a rental company when I return them. Overkill, maybe, yeah, but it's a lesson in life that my dad taught me at a young age. So if there's anybody that ever wants or allows me to borrow anything, they get it back in better condition than they lent it to me.
I especially love what you said about your mom. Don't let the fire go out. And that is such a strong lesson for many of us to remember. Now, you're 12 years old, life takes a turn, and it gets to a point where your fire almost goes out, quite literally. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, my dad and mom divorced, and he rented a little trailer just on the other side of the Georgia-Alabama line, and some things happened there at the company that he was working for, and at the same time, he had just turned down a job offer in Melbourne, Australia, and one in Germany, and didn't want to leave his family like that far internationally, but he did receive a job offer in San Juan, Puerto Rico, to run a canning plant for Goya Foods. Goya is a big company, big Latin-based canning and spice company. And my dad was a lithographer, so basically what he did is he coated sheets of metal in order for them to actually have canned material, and then on the other side, he did the lithography, printing right on top of the metal. Now everything's kind of shrink wrapped with plastic and stuff like that, but it really was an art form. It's really hard because metal doesn't have any bleed to it like paper does, so you have to be spot on and very meticulous with the colors and where they fall, and it really is an art. He didn't think it was that big of a deal, but it's pretty powerful. That's why you don't see many companies doing it anymore, but when you do see a can that's actually printed on the metal, it stands out from all the other ones. And so he went from making Pabst Blue Ribbon beer cans in Northwest Indiana for Continental Can to working for Libby's Foods and Seneca Foods to working for U.S. Can in Tallapoosa, Georgia, making all kinds of cans, aerosol cans, you name it, to actually running the can plant for Goya in San Juan. And so he took that job, and when he did, it was at a season of his life where I think it's safe to say, because I lost my dad on Valentine's Day in 2022, he passed away. Safe to say he'd be okay with me saying he went through a midlife crisis and went down there as a good-looking gringo, looked a little bit like Tom Selleck, and got a sailboat and an experimental airplane, and needless to say, a lot of the women down there thought that was pretty cool. So I felt like I was no longer a priority in my dad's life. And here he was, this larger-in-life figure, and I only got to see him once or twice a year. During that time, my mom went off the deep end and started dating a lot of different men that probably weren't good for her. They certainly weren't good for me. And the mental health challenges and the alcoholism and the drugs and the combination of bad relationships really began to take a toll. My youngest sister, moved out, moved in with another family, was removed from the family, and I stayed with my mom because my focus was just to make sure she would be okay. I knew that I wasn't being treated well. I knew I was being abused emotionally, mentally, physically, and the abuse ratcheted up over time depending on who she was dating. The abuse got pretty bad. One of her boyfriends sexually abused me one night before we were supposed to go fishing. He sexually abused me, and everything in my life began to crumble at that time. I didn't tell anybody. I stuffed it and was just praying for that phone to ring or my dad to show up and take me under his wing again, back like he did when we were pheasant hunting, and it didn't happen. And so the years compounded for the worst instead of better, and I saw my sister living pretty high on the hog with a very affluent family that basically signed the back of her child support checks, gave it to her, and she just put it in the bank. And I was working 30 hours a week bagging groceries at Thrift Town and people pleaser, and trying to put shoes on my feet and clothes on my back. My mom was on uppers and downers, so it depended on whether or not there'd ever be any food in the house. And so I was bringing food home and putting it underneath my bed and eating what I could, and really just being very private. I was a recluse. I was very much different than I am now, to where I'm highly intentional and engaging and wanting to have conversations with people that I don't even know, to hopefully making it through the day being unnoticed, and was experiencing a significant amount of depression, to where I was buying into the lies that I didn't matter, that I had no value, that nobody valued me. And it was the summer of 1987. It was a year before I went into high school, that I had made up my mind that summer that at the close of that summer, I would not be going to high school. I had not gone through puberty yet. I was battling a pituitary disease that actually did go undiagnosed until 16 days before my 21st birthday. So what I looked like at age 12 when I moved to Georgia is what I looked like when I graduated from high school. But that summer of 87, I had been pilfering my mother's sleeping pills. She had every prescription drug that you could think of, had doctors on speed dial, and she had sleeping pills, prescription sleeping pills. And so my thoughts were, Nathan, if one will put you to sleep, then I'm sure 30 will put you in the dirt. And so I had been pilfering her sleeping pills and hiding them under the mattress of my bed, knowing she probably wouldn't know that they're missing. When I got 30 pills, whatever day that was, I was going to take them all and hopefully never wake up again, and thought that that was really the only alternative to break away from all of the abuse, all of the neglect, all of the pain, and all the inferiority that I was feeling as I contrasted my life with everybody else's. And never said a word to my dad. And I began to resent my father so much because I needed him more than ever. And
there was also, as you talk about the lies, there was also this lie of you're not wanted. Like, if I remember correctly, you heard that specifically from your mom, that you were never wanted, right?
Yeah.
Like, imagine this being a small little boy and going from feeling like you're number one, seen in the world by your dad, like what you said, my dad would never let me go, and then feeling like your dad let you go, and then here you are alone, feeling all these things.
Yeah, well, my mom didn't have much of a filter. To this day, very much lived her life based on emotion only. And there were a lot of heated experiences in my life where she said a lot of things that I know she didn't mean, but we all are. I know I'm guilty of it. Sometimes in the heat of the moment, what do? We hurt the people that we love the most. But my mom would tell me and remind me, your dad never wanted you. She would tell me that when we got married, he made sure that I was on birth control because he didn't want any kids for a few years. And I do have an older half sister named Cheryl who lives in Denver. My dad was married before when he was in the service in the Air Force, and he didn't want to put all his eggs in one basket and be tied to my mom. Apparently he saw some things that he wasn't real sure about, but she would tell me, I wanted you. I would take those birth control pills and I'd flush them down the toilet, but your dad never wanted you. Just know that. And where is he now? He's in Puerto Rico doing whatever he wants, and he still doesn't want you. And that was devastating. You know, words are words, but boy, do they cut like a knife. You know, that old saying that sticks and stones may break my bones, but words can never hurt me is a farce. That is so untrue, especially as you're a young person battling life, trying to navigate life on your own in circumstances that are dire. And when you hear that about your hero, it makes you realize probably nobody wants you if your dad doesn't want you. And so that's the painful reality of being mindful and intentional on what it is that we say, how we say it, and to be able to put a bridle in our mouth whenever we feel forced to be able to respond. It's always good to step back and table it and listen, and then put a governor on whatever it is you're feeling right now, and let those emotions subside before you really clearly speak.
So you are at the end of your line. You are ready to put out the fire in your life. You're sitting in the back seat, and all of a sudden, a new hero emerges in your life.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I always sat in the back seat of my mom's car because I can tell you there were many, many instances where we would get into arguments that would turn into a physical altercation while she's driving down the road. And at the next stop sign, I'd open up the door and I would roll out of the door and walk home, hitchhike home or whatever. And so I knew if I sat in the back seat of my mom's car that she couldn't reach me. And so I would always get in the back seat, and I would tell her that I get car sick. I have to sit in the back seat, which is just the opposite of what really happens in life. You get car sick in the back. But I sat in the back seat for that reason. And my mother, who does have a good heart, I mean, she had a very tough childhood too, would I guess feel regretful and remorseful. And every once in a while, she'd say, we're getting up and we're going to church in the morning. And of course, I would roll my eyes. And this happened to be one of those moments where I hoped that she didn't get up in the morning, because I did not want to go to church. I did not want to be in the car with her. I did not want to watch her be sanctimonious and holier than thou. And this morning happened to be that summer where I was pilfering her pills. And it was one August day that summer, and on Sunday, that we went to church. And on the way to the church, she turns it to a Christian radio station. And of course, I'm rolling my eyes. And on the radio, there's no music. There begins a sermon. And that sermon hits me square between the eyes and in my heart. And that message on the radio was meant for me that day. A 14-year-old with dull edges, confounded, lost, confused, helpless, absolutely hopeless. This message addressed not only what I was feeling, but my worth and my value of God not making a mistake, and God creating me and everybody on this planet with a specific purpose in mind that was to fulfill our highest calling in life. And weaved in that sermon was adversity and how it finds us when we least expect it. And the wolf showing up at our door always shows up unannounced, and nobody is exempt from circumstances beyond our control. And God never wastes a single experience in our life, whether it's good or bad. But rest assured, if He allows it to come this far, it comes with a greater purpose in mind. And that purpose isn't just to bring out the best in you, it's to help somebody else too. I heard those words, and it gripped me. I began to cry. And by the time we got to the church, my mother didn't know what was wrong. I said, I'll be in a minute. And I never walked into that church building that day. I sat in the back seat of that car. I actually did get out because it got pretty daggum hot. Georgia in August is not a time you want to be sitting in the backseat of a car without air conditioning. But I had my first real conversation with the creator of all that is. And I said, if this is true, I want to experience you. I want to feel what I just felt on this radio every day of my life. And from that moment forward, every Sunday at that specific time, I listened to this preacher from San Diego, California, who at that time was pastoring one of the largest churches in America, one of the fastest growing churches in America, named John Maxwell, and began to be a student of John's through the radio.
I love that so much. And not only did you wait, because you're digesting the things that John is speaking over the radio and being filled with God's word, but you also took it a step further. Your grandfather asked you one day, what do you want for your birthday, right? And there's moments in time where a child asks for a toy. They ask for, the Red Ryder BB gun or whatever it is. But then there's a moment where there's a clarity and there's a wisdom. What did you ask your grandfather for?
Yeah, for my 15th birthday, I told him I wanted to join this Enjoy Life tape club.
A cassette tape.
He said, yeah, he said, what's that? And I said, well, there's this guy I've been listening to on the radio for the last several months, and he's got a tape club, and I want the tape. I don't have a checking account, or else I would have already done that. I had my own money. I told him that I would give him the money if he would get these tapes showing up at my house, and that's what he did. And so I began to bet on myself and invest in the things that could cultivate my masculine heart. When I needed my dad, he wasn't there. And so all of a sudden, John Maxwell became my spiritual father, but he also began to be somebody that I could look to and hear from to help cultivate that masculine heart that God had given me at such a young age.
We always think of turning points of like we turn and immediately everything in life gets better, right? It's not normally how that really happens. There's a long delayed growth period where you're investing in yourself, you're growing yourself. How did you get to that point to being at the doorstep of someone who's changed your life? What progressed you forward even into playing professional football?
Yeah, well, there has to be a shift in the mindset. Obviously, I began to really believe everything that I was learning from John and applying it. So it wasn't just the principles of the values, it was the practices too, because to this day, as well as I do, John's not somebody that wants to blow smoke up your skirt. He's constantly reinventing himself. He doesn't want to, his sugar stick sermons and talks are the best in the world, but yet he's always wanting to create something different and better, to be able to give people another level of growth, because every level of growth does require new levels of change. He helped me realize that God will help me be all that I can be, but he will never help me be somebody I'm not supposed to be. And so I just embraced the fact that I had to be courageous and constantly growing. And once you begin to grow on the inside, it begins to be kind of an addictive thing. You're able to set metrics to your awareness and how you respond to situations. And that's why I think courage is the most important of all virtues, because without courage, you can't practice any other virtue consistently. It takes courage to actually live out what love means. You got to have courage to be able to do that. You got to have courage to make the decision that might not be best for you, but it's best for the situation. It takes courage to get it right instead of being right. Maybe you have to high road your leadership a little bit. Maybe you are right, but maybe the bigger picture requires you to take a step of courage and not be right in order to get that relationship right. So for me, it became an addictive thing to grow myself as I was learning who I was. But I also realized the freedom when you take your eyes that are naturally turned inward, because we are so selfish, from birth. We are so selfish. We think about me, I. But when we take our eyes that are turned inward and we begin to shift them out and realize that with one trifling exception in life, the world is composed of billions of other people. And that one trifling exception is you. There's a lot of people out there that not only can you help, but you can learn from if you take the time to do what Mr. Rogers said, take the time to get to know people's story. So I became so addicted to living out what I was learning real time that I would, on my way from school, walking to Thrift Town to go bag groceries, I walked by this retirement home, this nursing home, and I would just show up and want to talk to some of these old people that were sitting out on the front porch, didn't have anybody to talk to. And I was learning about people. And the way that it felt for me on the inside was bigger. And of course, I told you I had a pituitary disease that, I wasn't growing physically, emotionally. I didn't go through a natural adolescence when your brain gets a chemical bath of hormones and it begins to help you be able to learn. It helps you be able to ascertain. It helps a lot of different things. I didn't have an adolescence. I didn't go through puberty, like I said, until I was 21. But in the midst of all of this chaos and turmoil, what was I focusing on? It wasn't my problems. It was other people. Because what we focus on expands in life. And we're always going to travel in the direction of our dominant thoughts in life. And when things were the worst for me, that's what I focused on. Things were still pretty dadgum bad, but my focus was on other people. And I put my energy and my time, my affections, and my intentionality on other people. And guess what happens? Your problems begin to shrink. Did they go away? No. But if I was focusing on what I could do to add value and serve other people, my problems weren't always first and foremost on my agenda. So the growth that I was learning and experiencing, I was instantly applying. And that's how I was able to navigate the rigors of a tumultuous teenage season of my life and do it with a smile on my face and to do it differently than anybody else around me.
And I love what you say about serving others, because you're right. Like, we are so selfish. We focus on ourselves all the time. Even in moments where we feel like we're putting the focus on someone else, really we're putting the focus on ourselves. Look at me. Oh, look, I'm serving this person. I'm such a good person. Look at me. When in fact, what we're really doing is we're still lifting ourselves up. But here's the thing. I love that you say serving others. When you go to this retirement home, we used to call them old folks homes, right? You go to the old folk home and you listen to.
Yeah, I'm almost in one.
And you go and you listen, and doors of opportunity open when you start to serve others. Hope you guys hear that. Doors of opportunity open when you serve other people. Rather than trying to serve your own wants, your own needs, your own desires, you start to serve other people, and then an opportunity opens up. And here's the big piece, because Jason talked about this earlier. When an opportunity presents itself, you have to do what his father said. You have to take your shot. Jason, what was that next shot in your life?
I graduated in 91. And so obviously not knowing what to do with my life, I did remember going to a couple of Georgia high school state wrestling banquets that were sponsored by Chick-fil-A. And I remember the feeling I felt when I walked into this intentional growth environment, not recognizing it as such at the time, but it was different. There was a carnation on every table. People were intentionally meeting you at the front door. They had Chick-fil-A name tags. The dinner was sponsored by Chick-fil-A. Dan, Kathy, Bubba, Kathy, Truett, Kathy's sons, both were big wrestlers. I had no idea. I'd seen Chick-fil-A in the malls in Georgia, but, I never heard of it, outside of a sandwich. But the environment, it was special. And the authenticity and the sincerity from these people made you feel like you had a shower on the inside. And I'd never forgotten that. So when everybody's either going in the military, which I tried to do, by the way. I was obviously denied because I hadn't even gone through puberty yet. Definitely was not excited about going to college, being somebody that looked like Doogie Howser, who really wasn't 12, but was really their age. I said, there's a Chick-fil-A freestanding unit being opened up, down the road in Carrollton, Georgia. Maybe I should apply to that, be around an environment I think can make me better. So that's what I did. I went and got a job at Chick-fil-A. Was one of their first ones that was hired there. It was a second freestanding unit that they'd ever built at that time that I remember. And I slowly began to apply and learn directly from Dan Cathy, Bubba Cathy. I was actually invited to ride motorcycles over at Truett's Farm with Dan and Bubba's kids. One of them is now in charge since Dan stepped down as the chair, and the CEO is now in charge. And I actually rode motorcycles with him, not realizing anything other than, man, this is cool. This is cool. I worked for Chick-fil-A for almost 4 years. Got a scholarship, didn't know where I was going to go, but got a scholarship to help pay for some college. So I started taking some classes locally and thought, you know what, I want to do something like that, but I don't think I'm smart enough to get a business degree. So in 1996, I decided to go to Bible college because at that time, my hero and mentor, John Maxwell, was a pastor. And I thought, well, maybe I could be a pastor. So I went to Bible college. And that same year, John moved from San Diego to Atlanta and started his Equip Foundation, his nonprofit, and began to build that legacy that we all know as the global premium leadership brand all over the world. So I went to Bible college and got a degree in theology and a minor in public speaking. Got to be mentored by some pretty cool people, and obviously run around a little bit with Kevin Jonas, Senior. Just so many great relationships that I have today that are still meaningful to me. But I had a drive innately. I wanted to have an impact. And in the back of my mind, I was wondering why, John left the pulpit to go do what he's doing now. That always intrigued me. So in 99, I was a part of the Promise Keepers movement, and John Maxwell was obviously a huge part of that. He was a keynote at a lot of their different events. And for the first time ever in my life, I got to hear him speak in person at the Georgia Dome that was blown up a few years ago. But I was there with 30,000 men, and John gave the keynote. And I can still remember where he was standing on that stage when he gave the same call to action that I heard years previous as a teenager in the back of my mom's car, back of her 1985 Mercury Cougar, and watched thousands of men come to the stage and say, I want God's best life for me. And I remember being up there by myself, Nathan, bawling my eyes out, saying, I want to do that. That's what I want to do. That's what I'm called to do. I want to do that. And never really thinking about how profound that statement was, but the purity and the sincerity of my heart was to be able to be a conduit of change the same way John was for me. And I just got to watch it happen through multiplication. And so I began to apply everything that John was putting out, and I was just living it as I was learning it. I got involved in a couple business opportunities. I started my own company, and I was adding value to people everywhere that I went, and it put me in some unbelievable circles. And in fact, when John released the 1 Million Leader Mandate, where the goal was to train 1 million leaders everywhere in the world, I was one of the original founding donors that gave to Equip for that. Drove all the way from Atlanta, Georgia to Las Colinas, Texas for a breakfast and a lunch and to play one hole with John of golf in the rain and drive all the way back home. And I began to do whatever it took to be in these growth environments and be around people that were bigger, smarter, more successful, and having a impact on people's lives in every way. But of course, my focus was to be as close to John any chance that I could get.
There came a time in your life where you had an opportunity to go and to truly sit at the feet of your mentor who had changed your life from a young age, fast forwarding through your entire life as you're growing, as you're developing yourself, as you're investing in yourself, you're investing in other leaders. And now all of a sudden you have the moment to sit at the feet of a man who's truly changed your life and to take a position. What brought you to that moment of getting to truly work for one of your childhood heroes? And by the way, for those of you that don't know, you've heard probably never meet your childhood hero because they'll always let you down. But that wasn't the case for Jason. That wasn't the case. You got to meet your childhood hero, and I think it lit you on fire even more to live a life of transformation. What brought you into working for Maxwell Leadership, getting to serve one of the leaders of leaders?
Yeah, well, obviously when John began his coaching company, it actually I received an invitation in 2011 to be one of the founding members of the John Maxwell team, and that hit me at a season of life where I thought, well, if John remembers who I am, he's going to be extremely disappointed when I tell him I'm divorced, I don't have a job, and I really don't know which way is up right now. so I talked myself out of it, but knew this was something that I should have been a part of. Fast forward a few years, I quit feeling sorry for myself. I did have some personal struggles that I had to work through and some personal failures. I know this all sounds like I overcame adversity, and everything worthwhile is uphill. And Jason climbed that hill and he jammed the flag on the top of Mount Everest, and it's been
sitting on the
all
mountaintop
uphill ever since. No, there's
yeah.
That's right.
Yeah.
The mountaintop is for inspiration.
No.
You don't live there. That means you got to go back down through a few valleys where the corn grows and then hit your next mountaintop. But I was in a valley in my life at that time, and I talked myself out of it because, I had been around everything John was doing. And as I told you earlier, if you want to get a good laugh, you can kind of find some of these old YouTube videos of John's first initial public teachings that were produced and published on the 21 irrefutable laws of leadership or the 17 indispensable laws of teamwork. And you're going to see a very youthful, young version of myself sitting on the front row of these teachings and these sessions. And I didn't want John to have all these high hopes for me and then me be able to tell him, I really don't have a good report for you there. But a few years later, I ended up putting my pride and ego off my shoulders and folding it up and putting it into my billfold. And I joined the John Maxwell team and began to put myself in those environments that I knew I was created for. And it wasn't long after that I was able to get myself out of the pile. John talks about getting yourself out of the people pile and just apply everything I'd been learning all these years in this environment. Before you know it, I was serving at different capacities for some of John's signature events, just volunteer wise, and never thinking anything about it, just being a part of the experience. And at the end of one of these events, I got the invitation to consider stepping inside the enterprise and actually being an employee of John's brand and working alongside of Mark Cole and just so many unbelievable people that have poured into my life and sharpened me. So for the last 5 years, that's what I had been doing up until recently when I've taken a temporary assignment, as Mark Cole put it perfectly, to really step outside of filling my cup and be a river, not a reservoir. And that's exactly what I'm doing now.
One of the things that I find so fascinating about your story is the feeling of being enough, of being willing to step up into the light. Like there's a point, we all know people in our lives that like the light, and they stand in the light and you say, hey, I think you should get out of the light for a little bit. You're looking kind of crispy right now. You're looking kind of red, lobster-like, and it's not a good lobster-like, right? But then there are people that you meet, and I'm going to say this because I don't think you'll ever say this, but there are people that you meet like Jason who are constantly stepping out of the light in order to push other people into the light, to be seen. And I think it's an amazing quality to have. I think there's also a piece here, though, that sometimes there's a feeling of not feeling worthy enough. Like you said, you didn't want to let John down, to let him, like, you were there. You should have learned everything. You should have applied it all. Now you're going to be, big man Jason Stoughton. And here you are getting to take this position, working under John. And there's this feeling of, man, I didn't steward well. I didn't do what I should have probably done. And so there's almost kind of this fear. There's this piece of shame and fear that derail and could derail someone in their life. And so I'm curious, in your life, because you've lived so much, there's so many things that you've experienced. How do you take that fear, that shame that you've experienced, and allow it to be transformational and move you forward so that you can have hope in the future?
Well, I think we all are faced with various degrees of challenges. One of the most important things that we can do in our lives is expand our capacity for growth, which means that we have to expand our capacity to be more aware, more aware of ourselves. We've learned through the 15 invaluable laws of growth that you have to know yourself to grow yourself, because life is like a mirror. It doesn't give you what you want. Life gives you who you are. And so we have to be able to be mindful of these fleeting opportunities where we get these checks in our spirit, and then take the moment to apply what we know we need to do in order to get another layer of growth or expansion of our awareness. And so we're forced in those fearful moments with trepidation, when we're staring at a gate, like a new calf is a new gate in life. They don't know whether to walk through it. They don't know what to do, and I live on a farm. So I see this as I'm getting ready to bring in some sheep onto my farm, and they're not the smartest animals in the world. So I'm sure I'm going to have that same experience when I bring them here, but we're staring at this gate, and we could either be feeding our faith or we can starve our fears. And if we want positivity and we want to become bigger on the inside so we can become better on the outside, then we have to have this positive life stance to whatever happens to us. And I love how John has helped me and so many other people like yourself really be able to identify what's a problem and what's a fact of life. A problem always has a solution. And truth be known, there's probably a lot more than one solution to a problem. But a fact of life is something that we can't do anything about. It's like my pituitary disease. To this day, my pituitary gland does not function. So I've got to take treatments on the regular, and have been for 30 years, that eventually have a byproduct of being treated synthetically because my body doesn't produce what it's supposed to normally. And that puts a strain on my internal organs, and those numbers are now not in the best shape like they were 10 years ago. But that's a fact of life. I mean, if it's a problem, I'll do something about it. I've tried everything under the sun, but there's really no other alternative. So I'm not putting all of my energy into focusing on the things I can't control. I'm putting my energy in those arenas where I can control the outcome, where it's up to me. And that is to feed my faith, to do everything that I can do within my ability, making the right decision, which doesn't necessarily mean I have to be right all the time, but doing the right thing and feeding my faith. And that's the focus of what a positive stance individual has, because their focus is on realizing that all we have is today. Today matters, and we got to make every single day count. But what can I do today that can have a lasting impact on others, but benefit myself till tomorrow is a little bit better than it is today. And it's not by feeding your fears. It's about stepping into growth instead of stepping backwards into safety. We have to make the uncomfortable things in life comfortable. And that's what my whole life has been about, Nathan. If there's one thing I do know is that it's almost scary to think about when things are happening and there's no hitches in the giddy up, nothing wrong happening in my life. Everything seems to be good. I'm not comfortable there. I'm like, something's not right, because I'm so familiar with taking life and leading it with intention instead of letting my life be led with what happens to me by default, and so I understand that rather than reacting to adversity, I can reflect on reality. And it's through those reflection periods that I'm able to realize the difference between a problem and a fact of life.
So Jason, you talked earlier about your dad, being a pivotal point early on in your life, learning a lot. And then, there's this period of life where your dad is gone. But that wasn't how that story ended with your relationship with your dad. Tell us about those later years with your dad and your relationship and how that was mended, how that was brought together, and kind of your takeaways from that.
Yeah, and I'm glad you're asking that question because Ecclesiastes 7:8 says, better is the end of a thing than its beginning. And if you really want to put a Charlie horse in your head, you can really think about what that means. But at the beginning, when we were looking ahead, we envision a possible future, not a real one. And the end of the season is usually more important than its beginning. When a person dies, we can see much more clearly who they really turned out to be. And that's the eternal significant piece. When a crop is harvested, we know what the farming diligence actually produced. And so there was a lot of strain on my relationship with my dad because I needed him at certain pivotal seasons of my life when a father should be with their son. But rather than letting the unforgiveness turn into bitterness and the bitterness turn into resentment, which basically means it goes underground at that point and then it begins to destroy you as a person, I wrote my dad a letter, Bible college, right before I graduated, and shared my heart. And for the last 20 years of my dad's life, I pursued him the way that Jesus pursues every single one of us, and was highly intentional about making the end better than even the beginning. And that's exactly what it was. And so my dad and I did a lot of memory creation. The last few years of his life and the last 20 years of his life were filled with unbelievable memories that I get to share with my girls, even more lessons that I learned from my dad as a result, but also share with them the most profound thing that my dad ever told me, which I'm humbled to say this, but telling me that he's proud of me. He wishes he could have been there for me more. He wishes he could go back and change history, but he can't. And that I'm a much better father to my little girls than he was to me. And I don't know how much of that is true, but I can tell you what I do know is true is what I told my dad. The past doesn't matter. All we get is today. And the most important thing that we can do with today is create a whole new ending. And that's what I was able to do with my dad.
That's so good. I love that. I hope you guys are taking amazing notes. Jason, I have one more question for you, but this time has been absolutely fantastic. I appreciate you so much for jumping on, for sharing your story. There is a word that I want you to talk about. There's two aspects to this word. One of them means a turning point. And I think we've talked a lot about the turning points in your life, but there's a second part of this word that means awakening. And it's a word that you live your life by. This is your life word, peripetia. It's a Greek word. Yeah. I'd love for you to define the word. I would also love for you to talk to the person that's listening right now who currently feels like they're at the rope's end. They feel like life is dead, that there's no path forward. They feel like everything around them is dark. And I'd love for you to speak to them from the place of where you've been to where you are. Not that you're in a place on the mountaintop where everything's perfect and everything's polished and great, but like we were talking about before we even jumped on, transparent lives transform lives. And Jason is one of those people who is so transparent in where he's been and where he is right now that I truly think that he can speak into this word, peripatia, and you guys are going to be able to take this and apply this to your life and take steps forward to truly have an awakening in your life. Tell us more about that, Jason.
Yeah, having been somewhat of a Bible scholar, I'm fascinated with Greek and Hebrew words because the English language is so restricted at being able to really help us articulate what we feel. And peripatia is similar to the word where we get metamorphosis from, metafuo, something like that. I can't remember really how to pronounce it. Metafuo, I think, is the word. And that's where there's a transformation where the inference is like from a caterpillar to a butterfly. But peripatia is just like you said, it's a turning point or an awakening. And challenging times in our lives can be a seedbed for personal growth. And I'm a firm believer. Don't just take my word for it. Just look around. Watch the nightly news. Adversity can do one or two things in your life. It can either define you or it can refine you. And that is where you need to feed your faith, is in letting the adversities in life refine you. Because when your comfort zone is dismantled, you're forced to face who you really are as a person. We all can improve. We never arrive. That's why I am a firm believer that there is no finish line in life. And that's why I'm focused on growth instead of goals. And that's why that resonates with me so much, making growth the goal. But you have to decide to decide. You know, John tells this quirky little funny story. You know, there's 4 frogs on a log. One decides to jump off. How many frogs are left? Everybody typically says, well, there's 3 frogs left. Well, no, there's not 3 frogs. There's still 4 on there, because once somebody makes a decision, that doesn't mean they acted on that decision. You have to decide in advance that whatever comes, what may, whether the wolf knocks on your door, doesn't have an invitation, you don't see it coming, that you're going to allow that circumstance and that situation be a refining moment in your life. You either decide that, or you just let the circumstances and the adversity define who you are. And we see that way too much. Decide to have turning points in your life. Let things that happen to you be what happens in you that brings out the best of you. And whenever you're faced with anything that you are you feel like is either unfair or you weren't prepared for it, you didn't see it coming, always ask yourself, what can I learn from this right now? Because my promise to you is that it doesn't matter what circumstance, what level of adversity we face in life. The one thing that I can promise you is that if it has come this far, that it is no surprise to God. So he's allowed it to happen for a reason. Don't second guess it. Don't try to put on your philosophical hat. Don't compare yourself to others. The only thing that you have to do is embrace the suck of life. Embrace it. It sucks, but embrace it and realize that if it has come this far, that it comes with a greater purpose that your finite mind cannot comprehend. Yes, good for you, but here's the best part. It's not just for you. It's for somebody else. Our experiences in life aren't just for us, they're for other people. So you could be the saving grace. You could be the John Maxwell in somebody else's life like John was for me. If you embrace the suck and realize that there's something bigger and better that's coming on the other side, if you allow it to refine you for somebody else. And then now the focus isn't on yourself, it's on other people. And I tell you what, there's no greater place to live than living for others, being in favor of other people, and really being a catalyst for change and transformation in other people's lives. But got to have an awakening, and you got to let it be a turning point in order for that to happen.
So good. Jason, I absolutely love that. For all of you listening, take a moment, share this episode with a friend, because this episode is truly going to change someone's life. And while you're at it, would you smash that subscribe button and take a moment to tell us in the comment section of what your favorite part of this episode truly was? Because at the end of the day, when people go and read those comments, it truly encourages them to listen to the full episode, to hear what you took away from someone like Jason, who truly loves and cares for people and wants to see the transformation in their life. And I love what he said. Friction creates heat, and it creates a fire. And like his father said, don't let the fire go out in your life. Allow that friction to make you into the person that you were created to be. So until next time, be more, see more, and experience more than before.